Hey everybody, it's Ken Pooch Van Druten with you with Chris Rabold. How are you, Chris?
What's up, everybody? Good, man. Good.
Yeah, hanging in there, huh?
Absolutely.
We just shot another video, but I'll say it again. Today, we're not using the same thing. It's why it looks a little weird. We're using Zoom today because I don't know if you've experienced this. I'm sure you've been watching all these web chats everywhere, Chris, but like sometimes, some days Zoom is good. Some days another, platform is good. It just all happens, it just depends on how many people are on the thing. Which is the entire world at the moment. Anyway, that's why it looks a little bit different. We're using the Zoom thing today. Don't forget about the headphone giveaway, which, by the way, where is the guy that won the head? Where's Gordon? What happened to Gordon?
T, where are you, bro?
Gordon T, bro. You're the first winner. Where are you?
If anyone's seen Gordon, let him know. got his headphones.
It's so weird that you would go sign up for that. And then I've hit him up like 3 times in email and no response. So if anybody knows Gordon in Las Vegas, like go to his house or something, knock on his door, make sure he's all right. Because he's got a free pair of M50 headphones coming to him. Anyway, I thought today what might be interesting is we have been getting a lot of comments on YouTube and on our Facebook and on Instagram.
Which, thank you, by the way.
Yeah, that's absolutely. Killer. Thanks, guys. It's really, really awesome. A lot of them are just thanking us for doing what we do, and we appreciate it very much. That's very nice. But some of them are kind of like, follow-ups to stuff that we've talked about before. So I thought maybe we address some of those, you know what I mean? Like, talk about some of the stuff. One of the ones, let me look over here. I'm going down and looking at comments, that people have sent to us. And, one of the ones is, they want to know, following up about the triggers. Remember we had that discussion about triggers on the toms? They aren't specific to it, but I don't know, maybe we talk them through again, how that whole trigger thing works.
Sure.
What do you think?
I know I saw someone commented there asking if we needed a DI or if one needs a DI.
Oh, that's a great question, right? So what's the answer to that? Like what do you have to do in order to make that work?
I'll tell you the quick answer is I never have in 20 years of doing it. I've never needed one. I did see in our comments where someone mentioned, they talked about an impedance mismatch that that's witty and it's witty. Yeah. But I've never needed to do it. I'm simply relying, I don't care about the sonic quality of that trigger.
Correct.
You know what I mean? If it's,
you're looking for the impulse, that's all you care about is the impulse of it.
That's all I need. So to answer that question, you do not need, all you need to do is just, if it's coming out female 1/4 inch, and I can't even remember if it's balanced or not. I'm guessing it's not.
I don't think it is. I don't think it is.
In looking at our comments, it made me go back. I'm like, shit, do I know what I'm talking about? And I went back and looked, and I can't even find any documentation on it. I can't imagine it would be because it's just not necessary. Even if there's noise on that line, it's not going to be significant enough to mar what we're looking for.
Totally.
So you don't need a DI. You just run it straight.
But what you do need is you've got to have a kind of a customized cable, right? Because you're plugging it into a stage box. So it's got to be an XLR male and 1/4 inch male on the other side because the actual trigger itself has a female. So there's a little bit of soldering needed in making all this work. So that was a question that some guy asked me, like, well, how do you get them, and then, I don't know if we were clear enough, but it's like, you plug it straight into your snakehead, into a stage box, they become just another input. Yeah. So I think that maybe some guys weren't, clear on that. So I think we cleared that up. One of our commenters has a thing here, and he wants to know a little bit about your process He says your process for virtual playback. Like what is your kind of day-to-day thing with virtual playback? Can you speak to that a little?
Yeah. In thinking about this one, I think the first thing that comes to mind is there's different phases of when I'm using playback. There's the rehearsal period, and then there's the tour period. If we're in rehearsals, that's kind of what you would think it is. That is probably on near fields if I'm somewhere isolated. As you know, oftentimes we'll do band rehearsals, at least, where we're kind of off in our own sort of makeshift control room. So that will usually be on near fields, and that is pretty much what you would imagine. That is just me working up a mix. That's just me creating a mix, shaping the song, and very much just that. So getting to know it, just working on the finer things. Then there's what it looks like on tour. And once we're on tour, as we've mentioned before on here, it's primarily maintenance stuff that I'm doing. I'm reeling things back in. I've noticed that things have gotten a little off kilter here or there, but I will also sprinkle in a heavy dose of, I need to work on this effect, or I need to work on this input, or there's this song that drives me crazy, you know? And then there's also, for me, sometimes I just want to go out there and just, it's the middle of the day. I just want to kind of get into my shit, you know? So at the beginning, it's generally on near fields with very little headphones. Once we're on tour, when we're in a big loud environment, or even if it's kind of mellow, I don't want all the extra chatter, and I want to be in a reliable, consistent listening environment to make these decisions. So I'll often put on cans.
Yep.
And I'll do it that way. What about you?
Well, I think I've spoken to this one a little bit on one of our previous videos, the system engineer video, when I spoke about, remember, I make a macro that allows the system engineer to keep working, and I do the same exact thing during the day. Man, I'll spend at least an hour every day in headphones. Probably more, to be honest. Just tightening up whatever I thought didn't go well yesterday. You know what I mean? So whatever it is, or maybe it's something that's been bugging me the entire time. So I guess the point of what I'm saying is that it's never done for me. There's never a time where I go, yep, everything's good, I'm just going to leave it alone. I'm always striving to and tweaking for something. There's always something I can kind of pick apart. And for me, that's using virtual playback. Like I wouldn't even know. I don't even remember how this all worked when I didn't have virtual playback. You know what I mean? It's like, that is like an essential tool. You know, a couple of videos ago, we talked about the 5 pieces of gear that we would need or that we love. To me, like, virtual playback is like essential now. Like this is really screwed up that I'm saying this, but I would give up all my outboard and plugins to have virtual playback. Me too. You know what I mean? Like that would be, if that was the only tool I could have was the console and virtual playback, that I would give up all the rest of it. Because being able to loop a tom fill over and over and over again, and you get it to the point where it's like, so, I mean, man, I work on the stupidest little things. Too. But little things matter, right? Like, I truly believe what makes the difference between a really good engineer and a superstar engineer is the tiny little details, not huge things.
For sure.
Yeah. I mean, like, for example, I've had comments specific to like instruments about my mixes in regards to several bands, not just one band, like several bands. I've had people say to me, hey, Pooch, you know, man, your toms are amazing, whatever it is, you know what I mean? And the reason that is true in several bands is because I've spent hours working on the stupid tom fill in each one of those situations using virtual playback. So, so I don't know if they are interested in the workflow of that, or have we spoken to that? I can't remember. Like, I use Reaper and an MGB. I mean, that's really kind of the simple explanation of how I do.
Yeah. And, you know, with both of us being on Digicos, and honestly, all of them is just a flip of virtual switch.
Right.
You know, I mean, it's you just literally boom.
Yep.
On the Digicos, it's listen to copied audio, or for me on the SSL, it's stuff I can't even remember what it's called or what it is. But
I can't either. You know that they dropped a console at my house in December. I had the L200 or whatever at my house for I don't know, about a month. It's pretty awesome. Mm-hmm. I got a chance to mess around with it. It's a good little console.
This is what a spoiled little bitch I can be.
I know, right?
I mentioned to someone from SSL, and I've been using it for years, that I just in passing that I needed to get one for something. And one day someone knocks at my door, and it's a freight company with a giant red road case. Wow. And the SSL, the 500, 550, whatever, wheels into here. Oh. And it sat there for like 2 weeks. And I didn't have anybody to help me put it up. I didn't have any time in my life for it. And it sat there for 2 weeks. And I just called him back. I was like, yeah, you guys can come get your desk now. So literally, it was just a prop in my house for a little while.
That's so funny. It's funny when you said that, I was like, oh, that kind of did sound like a spoiled bitch that they delivered a console to my house. But you know, in this COVID days, I'm seeing that. Have you seen that? There's like a bunch of dudes where console companies right now are like delivering consoles to people's houses.
Man, you know? I'm telling you, it's hard not to have it's hard not to pay attention to all the extra work people are doing right now. Yeah. And not to be kind of like, I need to kind of up my game right now. I mean, people are on it, or at least they're making it look as though they're on it, but you can tell the people that really are, that are working hard right now. So, yeah.
Kind of in regards to this, and just keep going a little bit on this path. So like during the show, are you a headphone guy? Like, do you solo up and grab stuff?
It depends on the show. It depends on how much I can get away from the big picture. Because what I do, I don't like put my cans on and listen to my. No, I have in the past. I remember I went through a phase where I would, but first of all, it's hard to check it's just so goddamn hard. You know, it's so loud. Even with as much isolation as you want, you're still working within a limited amount of space where you can really make critical decisions. What I do, I'm glad you brought this up. I will solo groups of things. Like I'll solo from the VCA level, and I'll do like bass, add guitars, add the keys. Oh, it's when I add the keys that it gets mucky, and then make that. That's what I do with headphones. As far as like mixing. And then of course if I need to track something down, I'll use it, but I will put them on, and I'm not afraid to do it. And I can do all of this without leaving that VCA level too, where for the most part, I mean, I'll still mix a solo with cans on, listening to the keys and the bass. Oh, wow. And sometimes I'll do this too. Sometimes if it's a really chaotic, hectic environment, I know what's going on because I know the mix, but I'm just going to be dead honest. Sometimes I'm just like everybody else. I'm like, what? I don't know. Like, so something's happening. I know. I need to go in and check the source. And that's when I put it under the microscope, which is what the headphones are for. That's awesome. Okay, let me check. You know what I'm saying? Let me check at this level to make sure. No, it's fine there. That's not the problem. So
you're way more of a calmer dude. My answer to when something is like not right is throw the pair of headphones at the system engineer and go find it. And meanwhile, I'm still trying to mix, find out what's broken, you know. And he's like literally over my shoulder, like trying to solo up things to try to fucking find shit. So you don't
put them on during the show?
I don't. The only time I will really put on headphones is if something is totally awry, and you know there's an input that's just sitting there going and we got to find it, and we have to find it fast. Then I'll rip headphones on, put them on, and start playing whack-a-mole until I can find whatever's broken. But as a general thing, it's interesting. I've watched some major front of house guys that do the show like this. They do the show like this, and then they're doing this all the time, and listening to stuff and mixing, and then doing stuff. Like literally, they mix a show with a pair of headphones, on their neck.
I'll do that a lot, to be honest. Not all the time. I mean, if I do this, if I take them off and put them on their thing, that's a great sign. Oh, okay. But conversely, what can be a great sign is if I am sitting there like this. Yeah. and I've got them on,
and
I'm just kind of listening. That means we're in such a good place that I can just check the fuck out for a minute.
That's great.
Just kind of work on something.
I'm going to work on something. But that's good.
When they're off and off to the side, that's what you want.
Well, that's awesome. So that's an interesting another example of how you and I have different workflows. Like literally, I depend on my headphones in the afternoon for virtual playback. Like that's the total deal. Getting the room out of stuff and really listening to minute changes in pairs of headphones is the only way. If I didn't have that tool, it would be tough. But then after that, like once we've done line check, after changeover, like I always do line check. I don't, I know there's guys that have their system engineer do a line check. You know what I mean? It's like, but I am one of those dudes. It's like, I want to hear every single input and know that it sounds right. And, but after that happens, and when I put them on the peg and the show starts, that's it, man. Like I don't, you can pretty much pack up my headphones.
And that's really, I don't say there's a right or wrong way.
There's really no right way. There's no right way.
I shouldn't say that's the more. Yeah, I think that way has always appealed to me. I've just always been that guy. Quick to grab them when I need them.
That's cool.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
So do you? And we kind of traveled down this rabbit hole about headphones, but do you like what kind of modes do you do in listening in headphones? Do you AFL, PFL? What do you do?
PFL is really only for line check.
Me too.
You know what I mean? After that, PFL is only for line check, or let's say we've got a singer who changes from a headset to a handheld there's a change in the set, to be like, okay, he's got it on. Okay, cool. It's working, or he or
That's
she.
interesting. You know what? Now that you say that, I have done that in several pop gigs where I have pulled up my headphones to make sure to verify that the artist is coming back out with the handheld versus the headset. Like I've literally soloed them both up, grabbed my phones and been like, okay, which one? Okay, he really is going to come out on the handheld,
Yeah.
That's like gig keeper.
Yeah. Oh, totally. And I've used it to where the singer goes, there's a big elaborate segue. The singer goes back to the quick change booth, pulls the headset mic, drops it around her neck. I want to know what the climate is up there. Totally. I want to know how we're doing. I want to know what's getting cut. I want to know, you know what I mean?
So you're a spy. You're one of those guys. I love it.
Are you kidding me, man? I will, during rehearsals, I will solo up a pair of overheads and crank the headphones as loud as they will go just to listen to what some of the banter is. You know what I mean?
So great.
Just to get any little thing. So I'll do that. Once the show's going back to the kind of the original part of the question, I will, during the show, it's all relative. I'm listening to something relative to something else.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So it's always AFL. And I typically am doing it at the BCA level. I'm usually just listening to the whatever's there. So, once we get going, it's AFL.
Yeah. And also just to point out, in case anybody, thinks it's different, the virtual playback period where you're working on all kinds of stuff for me is all solo in place. Like I want it all to be, panned correctly. The effects, after fader solo. I don't use PFL at all when I'm doing any sort of virtual playback stuff. It's that's for me. PFL is all about line check. So cool. All right. Well, I think that answers about the virtual playback question. Somebody else, I was looking down here at some comments and somebody was talking about sidechaining. Just sidechaining in general.
Oh, I saw that.
What do you sidechain, if anything? Do you sidechain a lot of things?
Nope. I saw that question and I thought that was a good question, mainly because I want to know what you say to this. I'll tell you what I do. I will sidechain. Well, first of all, of course, the triggers that's a sidechain.
Correct.
Process there. But the only things that I will do, I will always take. I know some people will tell you that the snare through the hi-hat is part of your snare sound.
Yeah.
And that's real. See what it sounds like, check the phase against your snare, do those sorts of things. I always duck I'll make a bus. And it's always called SNSC, snare sidechain. And it will typically be all of the snares routed pre-fader through some aux or a bus or some shit. And then they will go to and I can use this for any number of things. I can use it on the hi-hat channel where it'll drop the snare, but you got to be real careful with the release.
You do.
It works until it doesn't work.
Yeah.
So I'll do that. I've also used it on overheads if I do have like some weird wonky placement and I just don't want the snare.
Right.
But you can't just destroy it because there's going to be times where he's hitting the snare and a cymbal or the cymbals decay. So I'll do that. That snare sidechain bus that I mentioned, you can also use it if you do create your own gated snare verbs that I mentioned in another videos. Other than that, I've played with sidechaining the bass to the kick drum, which is probably the most common bit of sidechaining that's done nowadays. When you answer, I'm going to try to think if I do anything else. But by and large, that's all I do is really stuff to kind of clean the snare. I'll take it out of the ride sometimes too. That's pretty much it. So it would be that's pretty much it for me.
That's interesting. The snare thing that you're talking about, creating some sort of bus that has all the snare drums, because most of the gigs that we do have 4 snare drums or whatever. Right. I know. Is that something that you generally build into your file, like your offline, even before you show up? Is that something that's already there?
Yes, I know I'm going to do it.
Interesting.
100%. Yeah,
that's cool.
I know and if I know I want it, it's just part of my workflow.
It's right. It's available to you, and you use it or you don't. But it's something that you always set up starting out with, which I think is interesting. My adventure in sidechaining has always been. Like, it was never really on my radar in analog land. Like, I never really. A lot
of this stuff wasn't. I wasn't doing that on a hi-hat with an XL4.
Right. Exactly. You could, but that was never, it wasn't ever like, I don't think back then you would, if we were having a discussion about, mixing on an XL4, that wouldn't be something that we would bring up. You know what I mean? That just wasn't. Well,
we had X amount of space and cabling. And
totally.
Do I really want to ask for another blah, 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 blah,
Yes. Yeah.
So
it is foreign to my workflow. Like, sidechaining to me in general is emergency. I need something to fix what's going on in general. So I don't tend to, I've tried all the stuff, right? Like, everybody always talks about, sidechain your bass guitar to your kick drum, blah, 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 blah. And it never works for me. I can't make it work. I don't know why. Every time I do
I know that feeling.
Every time I do it, I go initially, sometimes I go, oh, well, yeah, that's better. And then about like 5 minutes later, I'm like, man, that's just not working. I don't dig it.
Or I miss the bass and the kick working together.
Yeah.
Where we would both probably enjoy it more is if we were doing like EDM, where it's supposed to be like gush, gush, gush.
The pumping,
That's the point.
That is the point of it. But I mean, dude, you look on the internet right now, and there's 100 YouTube videos of some engineer talking about that's what he does.
Right.
It doesn't work for me, and it wasn't. You always fall back on like what your fundamentals of what you started with. And so, it's funny. I still think analog a lot.
Me too.
Like,
Me too.
When I am, talking about putting plugins in, I still think like a guy that only has 2 1176s and has to make a decision about where those 2 are going to go. Like, I don't ever go, oh, I can put an 1176 on 36 channels. I go, oh, I've only got 2 of them. And I can, that's kind of what's going on behind the scenes, in my brain. So the sidechaining to me is something that I've experimented with, but never really worked. Now, the only thing that I do sidechain, and I do pretty much on a regular basis, besides the triggers, is the band bus with the lead vocal sidechain to the band bus with a mid side compressor. So in Waves land, that's an F6 that'll do a mid-side compression at about 1K is where I usually set it up. I kind of sweep, like I'll find where the sweet spot.
Pulling out in the middle.
In the middle. Yes. Its whole job is to suck out just a little bit in the center whenever the vocal happens, right? So it just makes a little extra space in the center, because we always talk about, panning. Remember we talked about how I don't ever want to have something overlapping another thing in that panning space. Well, in the center, you don't have that option. The snare drum, the bass guitar, the kick drum, they all share that space. The vocal, you can spread out guitars, you can spread out keyboards, you can spread out playback, all those things, you can get them away from the center, but they're still going to be like 8 inputs or 10 inputs that are sharing that panning space, that center. So making space for your most important input, which is your vocal, has been a really handy tool for me. I've probably been doing it for the last 5 years at least. I would say, I can't think of an artist that I haven't used it on in the last 5 years, because it's just kind of part of my workflow, I generally, just so you know, I don't start that way. I build the band and then add the vocals without that process happening. Okay. Yeah. So that F6 is not dipping 1K from the beginning. It's kind of about the same time that I start doing mastering on my Mixbus. When I start talking about, which brings up a really good point. Let's talk about our Mixbus stuff, because there was a bunch of questions about that too. I'll speak to that really quickly. So my Mixbus, it's funny. A lot of people always want to know, what's on my Mixbus? What's on your Mixbus? What's on your Mixbus? Right. Because I think that they think that whatever it is that I have on my Mixbus is the magic. That's what's happening, but I don't think like that at all. My Mixbus is super subtle and super just tickling a little bit and kind of just mastered. Now, there's a lot of groups before that have some pretty heavy compression. The band bus has the 2500 on it, and it's, getting into 3 dB of compression. It's, pumping. But the Mixbus itself is not that's not the place where I add all kinds of magic. So I think it's funny that people ask that. So the Mixbus for me is kind of I don't even put a plugin on the Mixbus until I've totally got my shit together. Everything is kind of lying in there, and I'm at the point where I'm working on just minute things, right? Then I'll say, let's put a C6, for example, on my Mixbus just to be kind of a mastering tool. Just to kind of tickle some frequencies, and the output of my desk has a little bit of a mastering feel to it. Well, the reason I went down that rabbit hole was because that F6 that's on the band bus that is sidechained from the vocal, gets instituted right around that same time. It doesn't, I am trying to make my vocal pop without that tool. And so, doing everything that I can, using all the tricks and everything in my toolkit to get that vocal to, really get over the top of the band. And then when I get to the point where I'm adding a little mastering to my Mixbus, that's also when I instigate the F6 on the band bus. And then I go, oh shit, man, now the vocal is really, coming out.
Right.
So I spoke a lot about the Mixbus shit. Talk about that. Talk about the Mixbus stuff.
I have a 90% of the time for the past, God, I don't know how many years, my Mixbus has looked exactly the same. Now, when I'm home or when I'm doing if I'm doing virtual playback, I keep going back to the same thing, but I know a lot of different things that could do something I also like for me. So my Mixbus is often, we talked earlier about think it was when we were talking about drums. It was like, when do you engage, parallel compression or this or that or whatever. I too don't start with a lot of the sweeteners in place. In other words, for the same reason as you, I want to know that the source is as good as it can be, right out of the gate.
Yeah.
But I will start mixing into bus processing fairly quickly once I know I'm in a pretty good spot, because it is part of the sound, and mixing into it does help shape the sound, particularly, and all this is great. All these videos are tying into one another. Then we start talking about snapshots. If I'm making this story, it needs to kind of interweave with itself from, song to song, chapter to chapter. So for me, that mix bus is usually, it's usually just two things. Sometimes it's as many as four. The two that it always is first, there is a compressor on there. I really, really like the sound of VCA-based compressors, traditional, just thinking, kind of going back to like SSL type bus compressors. So mine, which we've talked about on here quite a bit, mine is the 2500.
Yep.
That's been in place for me since 2007. I think I got my first one. And that then goes into, this order used to be reversed. It used to be saturation first, then compression. I now go compression into saturation. And the reason that I do that is I view saturation, aside from the tonal coloration that it gives, I look at it also as a limiter, because it oftentimes, all of the time, is shaving off transients. So I want that to come after the compression. The thing there is, you got to be careful, because when you're tweaking your compressor, you're now tweaking how hard you're going into that saturation. Right. Yeah. So saturation for me, again, is that Sonic Farm Creamliner. I also like, it's funny, before COVID-19 happened, I had this big Mixbus shootout planned, and it was going to be the Sonic Farm Creamliner versus the HG Designs Black Box versus the SSL Fusion versus my buddy Jeff Terzo and the Overstair MAS. And then I was maybe going to throw this one other thing on there, but it was just, I love the saturation stuff, and I just want to make sure I'm in the best spot I can be. So awesome. Those two things are in place: compressor, saturation. After that, I have recently sort of gotten into Mixbus EQ, but I don't like to go there too much.
Interesting.
I don't like, it's very lightly. It's usually via a plugin. The Creamliner itself actually has like a low and high band shelving thing. And then finally, this is a risky one. If I can get away with it, I will put some sort of modern time limiting at the very, very end, like an L2, or the precision limiter within Live Rack is something that can do it. There's a lot of other ones in the native world. I keep going back to that stuff, but I would like to use like Fab Filter. But I will let it get 1 to as many as 4 dB to really make it that, again, and this goes back to, that might not necessarily be my favorite sound, but that is the sound of today.
Exactly.
So, and when I say if I can get away with it, that means, can I survive with the vocals being subject to that? And again, raising that noise floor. So those are the 2 to 4 that I use. I too separate out mixed music and vocals into 2 separate buses, but I try to keep them all on the same one if I can. I like that sound. So,
interesting. Well, what's interesting is that, again, we have 2 completely different workflows. My the stuff that you are talking about, you're doing to your Mixbus, is happening earlier in the chain for me. So it's happening in groups, and maybe even in individual inputs. I'm shooting for, like, especially like saturation. Like, I don't ever put saturation on my Mixbus. And I do individual things getting saturated. I do that. But the overall end product I don't really mess with. So it's a different philosophy, getting the same, good result, we hope. But just the way that my thinking is, I like to work on something earlier on in the process, if that makes sense. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And all of those things that I mentioned, I will bypass all of them at any given time.
So when you start, are those all bypassed? Like when you are in rehearsals, when do you instigate those things?
Pretty quick, man. I would say a few days into, once there's kind of a band mix, kind of maybe around, you're talking about when do you instigate automation, kind of maybe even before that. It's pretty soon. Okay. Because I too, though, even though they're there, like the Mixbus is 1 to 2 dB. I mean, it's not doing. Now, to me, because my Mixbus, I mix very hot. I mix too hot, if I'm honest. I am pummeling the saturation stuff, which means it is really doing what it's supposed to be doing. When people oftentimes mention they don't hear saturation devices or plugins or whatever, hit it harder and you'll hear it.
Oh yeah. For sure.
So, anyway, it's pretty early on, but they're not doing a ton.
Got it. Yeah. That's interesting. I have always been, I think way back in analog land, I was the guy that didn't do a whole lot of bus compression either. Like I was inputs, like I was like focused on effects and choices on the inserts of the inputs, get it to a bus. And then I didn't usually do a lot of bus compression. Like that came to me kind of later on in the digital journey a little bit.
Yes.
Where I then kind of adopted into my workflow this, I'm going to kind of master each of the groups, you know what I mean? And help them to, do whatever. So it's not my first thing. Like it doesn't come to me first to mix into compression, right? Like to mix into bus compression is foreign for me. So which is different than what you just said. For me, I don't institute bus compression usually, except for like drums and parallel bus compression. That's different. But like bus compression on guitars and keyboards and stuff in my workflow kind of happens, I would say like later on in rehearsals, like where I start to feel like, oh, okay, I have a handle on what's happening, but now I kind of want to master that group, if that makes sense. That's just how I think, Yeah.
And I mean, you said the word master, and I think of mine is more, and I too, in analog world, it was probably, I mean, I didn't have a stereo, but I didn't care, it wasn't part of my workflow. But also you think about where we are now. We're in that era. There's a reason all these people are asking. It's this thing that you're like, you almost feel like you have to do it.
Right.
And it is like the question, is like, what's on your Mixbus? And that's just kind of where we are now. So for me, it's more, once I got into it, I really got into it. And I did get into it at the very end of the analog days. But, mine is more like mixing a mix bus processor. And it's only when I put in the limiter or the EQ that it's more mastering type mindset. So that's cool.
What's funny is that I also know that the XL4, which is a desk that I worked on for 10 years, its busing has this thing called output biasing. And so when you really nail the bus on an XL4, it has natural analog compression that happens there. So even though I wasn't putting compression on my analog groups, let's say, it was happening naturally in that desk. So I didn't discover that until I got onto digital desk, where I was like, this is really clean. Like I'm sending stuff to this group and it's not doesn't sound as good. Like what is happening? And a lot of that I discovered by talking to a tech guy. He's like, oh no, dude, those XL4s, they had output biasing that, basically was, 4-to-1 compression. When you really got into the yellows on an XL4, it started to do this, into the group. And so I didn't realize it, but I probably was. I was mixing into compression. Yeah. But yet my workflow and the way my brain works, that isn't a go-to. That's not like the first thing that I do. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting that we both kind of do it differently. Cool. Well, that's Mixbus stuff.
So there you have it.
There you have it.
That's another one of those where I could go for days talking about things that I like to do or would like to do or that I'm aware of or different techniques. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because there really are a million different things you can do there.
Okay, here's one that I had a bunch of people ask. The guys that are watching this, there's a lot of them that don't have the same tools that we have. It's just they don't have it. They don't have a Digico. They don't have the opportunity to mix through some thousands of dollars worth of gear, and maybe what they have is a Behringer and some mica. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like maybe those are their tools, and there was a lot of questions like if there's a different approach to that kind of workflow for you, like if you show up to a church, for example, like because that's usually where you're going to find this stuff. How do you handle that situation? Like, do you do things differently? Do you think things differently? Like what,
I do. Okay. I think for me, and it's not often that I'm in that situation,
right?
If I'm honest,
luckily,
but here recently it came up. Now, mind you, the bare bones that I used was still a Midas digital console. So it was still a high-end piece of gear, and I actually really, really, really like the way that desk sounds, just like what's in it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I like the way the EQ sounds, but I'm not crazy about the dynamics, and I'm definitely not crazy about the effects. So it was this thing where I had to use it, and it was fine for what we were doing. The fact that I had to use it, quote unquote, for me. But for that, I went in with the mindset of, man, I'm not doing any of my shit. I'm not doing any of my bussing, like zero bussing, zero. And I just committed to that. I went in there and it was just everything straight to the left, right bus. Fortunately for this thing, this is for the Kenny Chesney thing that I do, and everybody in that band's a badass, has a great tone. So, I mean, it was kind of already done for me,
right?
But I did it. The only thing I used was my approach to gain structure, and that was it. Other than that, I just kind of pushed everything up, and it was great because you and I, as much as we talk about, I don't know how I lived without playback, and I don't know this and that. There's a part of me sometimes I'm like, shit, do I even know how to dial anything up fast anymore? And to be honest with you, the only thing that's not scares me, but that bothers me or gives me concern about dialing a mix up fast is, God, we talk about gates a lot, but it's like drum is gates.
Oh man.
That. I mean, everything else I can spin up in 5 seconds, just like the rest of us. And to be honest with you, I can dial in a drum sound with these gates super, super, super fast too. But that's like a tedious thing that if you don't get right can cause big problems.
Totally.
So, you know what I mean? So for the most part, yeah, my strategy does change. No plugins, no frou-frou shit. There might be a drum reverb. There might be a vocal reverb.
Yeah.
Maybe a delay, and that's it. I mean, it's not like we don't know how to do it.
No, right. I mean, so the question is a hard one because it's like, well, the answer is I'll do whatever it takes to make it sound good. So
exactly.
So it's hard to speak to what that means, but I will say that just like you, my workflow totally changes. I'd like, okay, if I don't have the bells and whistles, then it's going to be real, meat and potatoes, man. Here we go. We are going to, go in there and not use all the bells and whistles and whatever. It's funny. A few years ago, before Chester died, he was singing in Stone Temple Pilots, and I was doing a run of that, and they either purchased or they had a deal with or someone, but they got I think it was a D Live. Can't remember. It was something, a more.
Is that the Allen and Heath?
Yeah. Okay. I think it was more of along the consumer line of, right. I don't know, whatever. It's
I know what you're saying.
A console that was under $100,000. Let's just say that, you know what I mean? It was whatever. And I had a little trepidation about that. Like I was showing up to that going, I don't know what's going to happen here. You know what I mean? I'm not going to have my tools but you know what? It was fine. It was one of those things where, and actually in the end, I want to make sure that I'm saying this right. I think it was a D Live, and God, I hope it, I know, because the reason that I want to be clear is because it was actually a really good experience where that console actually sounded pretty good. Like in the end, I was kind of like proud of myself. I was like, wow, this is actually sounded pretty good on this thing. But again, like your Kenny Chesney experience, it's like, well, it's Stone Temple Pilots, dude. I mean, like, how do you fuck that up? You can't. Right. They're amazing. All three of them are, unbelievable. And then Chester was amazing. I guess, it's a hard answer, but it is also an answer of you use the tools that are given to you. The only kind of, parallel I can describe to that is, I get to use the $100 hammer when I'm building the house. But if you gave me the $10 hammer, I'd still build the house, right? You know what I mean? I'd still use it to build the house. So, same tools, just, it kind of used in different ways, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that answers the questions out there, but that was one of the questions. Here's a good one. Another one. Stereo inputs, placement, and how wide. Keyboards, guitars, and overheads. So, how do you place your stereo inputs generally? Like, what are the things that you hard pan, and what are the things that you, even though they're stereo, maybe you place them somewhere? Like, speak to that.
That's great, and that's actually, I'm looking at all these comments. I don't remember seeing that one, but it's ironic because I recently read something where someone was talking about, if you've got a ton of stereo keyboards, if you've got stereo keyboards, and they're all hard pan, after a while, you essentially just have this cluttered sort of mono.
You do. Yeah.
Kind of thing. And it's really, man, I do a ton of stuff with a lot of keyboards these days. And it's kind of made me rethink some of that. I'm like, maybe I need to play with, because to answer the question, when it comes to keyboards, I think every now and again, I'll take a piano and I'll bring it in some.
Yep.
The piano is about the only one that I'll bring in. Everything else, depending on how stereo, but usually there's movement, but it's usually not, you can get away with going super wide. Usually with keys, I'll actually widen them some more. Which is also a very modern sound. So pianos, sometimes I'll bring in a little bit, but a lot of other stuff, synthy kind of stuff, I'll actually kind of spread it out more. Overheads, a lot of times when I start a session, I will hard pan them, and then I'll end up bringing them in because sometimes, again, because we're in live sound now, the difference between stereo imaging and that's coming from 1/10 of a mile away from that sound, it's just too unreal. So I don't know that I always want a crash that's only heard over there. You know what I mean? Same thing with guitars. We've talked about guitars, but if it's the same source, sometimes I will hard pan them. But if it's different people, I just can't afford to put somebody way the hell over there and somebody else way the hell over there. So sometimes I'll say this, and then I'll kind of shut up for a second. it does depend. You said typically, so that's typically. It does depend on the gig, because sometimes I often think, what do I want on the furthest reaches? Like if I want a big guitar sound, I want the guitars to be eating up, to be this massive driving force, not, if I want some sparkle or this and that, maybe the overheads do go out there. So that's it. And so as far as width goes, it's usually either stereo or really stereo. On occasion, do I bring things in?
Interesting.
Guitars, a whole other conversation. Guitars could go every which way. I don't even know what to say typically there. What about you?
So here we differ again. I generally almost always hard pan my overheads, and that is the space that the overheads get to occupy. Like nobody else gets that space. So that being said, I will definitely make sure the image of that is a stereo image of the drum kit with the snare drum in the center of that. Like if you solid up my overheads, you'll discover that I've adjusted my mic pre's or my trims so that despite where the microphones are, I've shifted the whole kit to be in relation to this hard pan left and right, if that makes sense.
It does.
So, in my world, I subscribe to this on a pretty, hardcore level, in that no one instrument in any of my mix gets to share the same panning space. Okay. Mm-hmm. So if the overheads are hard panned, nothing else gets to be hard panned. So what that means to me is keyboards, if there's 6 of them, I'll actually have them they're hard panned, but they're just a little bit in. And then the next keyboard is a little bit more in. And the next keyboard is a little bit more in. In other words, just touching the hard pan, but not hard pan, not definitely hard panned. And I tend to actually, with keyboards sometimes, when there's a bunch of them, I'll even start making pockets of them, where I'll take a stereo image and make a pocket of 8 o'clock to 11 o'clock. Right. So it's
that's when I read that article, that's what I started thinking of, that maybe that's the move. Maybe I need to experiment with doing some of that.
So that I've been doing that quite a bit recently, so that they're spaced and they have kind of a panning to them. They're not defined in a pan, they're like this, but they're over here. And then I put another keyboard over here. And I think a lot about sympathetic panning. A lot.
I was just getting ready to say, I'm very big on, and this is actually something that I wished, the only thing when we finished talking about guitars, I wish I had talked more about how much I put stock in a symmetrical mix.
100%.
And which is what you're saying too.
Yeah.
It needs to be equal weighting. There doesn't have to be, but for me, I prefer, and I think that way. If something's over there, what's its counter?
Dude, like Beatles records, and like there was a band in the 90s called Delamitri. Do you remember that band?
Yeah, totally.
But
wow.
But Massenberg mixed those records, right? And his whole philosophy was put the drums all the way on the right side, put the bass guitar on the left-hand side. So literally, if you hard panned your stereo, you could you would only have the bass guitar. Right, Motown. Mm-hmm. Those kind of mixes drive me insane. Like,
I don't know how they pulled it off. I
don't
really
either.
I don't see how it does. It isn't just like an assault. That's just,
So I hear those things now, and on a novelty level, I'm like, oh, wow, that's kind of cool that the bass is coming out of that side and the drums are over there. But I am so like focused in my work in what you just described, like symmetrical frequency sharing and symmetrical panning and symmetrical depth, so that this whole space is frequency wise shared the same, and also panning shared the same. It's like I spend hours like getting that right,
And see, and I love it's so cool we're talking about this. So thank you, whoever wrote this one, because this is something I've been thinking of. And I've thought, if I do like some of what you're talking about, where you've got like 8 and 11, or you've got it, that might then caused me to want to approach things differently, where I am now automating panning. Because if I've got a Juno that's doing this, now I need that guitar that I say I never audit. Now suddenly, like, something's got to be over there. You know what I mean?
Totally know what you mean. Yeah.
All of those keyboards aren't often playing at the same time. So it's going to, if I do some of this, it's going to cause me to approach some things differently. But it's something I'm interested in. I really like, talk about modern mixing. It's just insane how wide records are now.
Oh, man.
Unnatural, but also really cool how wide they can be. And again, we can only get away with so much live, but wherever I can, I want to do that too, because I like it. You know what I mean? I
do too. I like the outside of it. I don't like the phasey middle of that in some of these records.
I will do this, and I think this is the way a lot of people are getting away with it. You know, if I just have, like, on the stereo bus, if I have some widening there, which, first of all, make sure it's as phase coherent as it can be, whatever the tool that you're using. A lot of times I'll bail on it, because the nature of raising, oftentimes with its mid-side processing, and it's simply just raising the level of the sides. In doing that, you lose the power of the center image. So what I will do, oftentimes this is something in the past few years I've done, is I will have we talk about busing, I will have a bus that is a width bus. So that, and it's generally only keys. And even though it's almost counterintuitive, I say you can't hard pan a guitar, but I'll still take guitars that are panned like this and sometimes throw them through that width bus. So it's kind of like where you're going against what you just said, but it's a different sound. So that's how I'll do it. So I can still keep the kick, snare, punch.
Oh, that's interesting. So you pull that guitar out of whatever bus it's in and only put it through the width bus then at that point.
So that width bus that exists just for that very reason. So I can have some widening, but not lose the center image, not lose the punch or the vocal dip or whatever.
That's cool. I'm stealing that. That's great. That's a great tool to have available. I hadn't thought about that. So that is stereo inputs, I think. I mean, for me, I'm a super stickler about, like I said, about frequency space and panning space. So when you described, having to move things or whatever, I don't do that. Like, I would find I would only put something at 8 and 11 if I had something else that was similar playing all the time over here. Understood. Do you know what I mean? So, I do. But if you could figure out how to make that work, which I don't do any sort of snapshot panning usually. But I smell what you're stepping in with that. That's kind of cool. That could be cool, What do you do with, what about tracks? Tracks. That's great. That's great that you bring that up. Yeah, that's different for me. But I am not the guy that just immediately left and rights everything. So, if it's, 16 stereo stems, definitely not all 16 are panned hard left and right. You know what I mean?
Wow. Interesting.
Yeah. No, I bring, and this is when I'm talking about the space from all the way hard pan to maybe 8 o'clock over here and 5 o'clock over here. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I'm keeping little spaces for each one of those kind of stereo inputs to give them kind of their own panning space. Because I truly believe it makes a difference. Even if you have something, if you put something at 8 o'clock and if you put something at 7:58, it makes a difference, like panning wise. This is interesting. We can go down a rabbit hole here. It's kind of why I subscribe to the external word clock thing, because I've discovered in my journey that a better word clock has better panning definition.
It does.
Believe it or not.
It's that to me, that's the whole thing that it does. The cell for me is what it does to the width of the stereo image.
Totally. So for me in digital audio, hard left, hard right, and center are always well defined. but it's the problem. The problem is between hard left and right and center. You know what I mean? There's kind of this weird ethereal place where I felt like in analog land, there was definition in every single panning point of that. I don't feel like that. And it's funny because I especially notice it in a really cheap console that has a really cheap word clock. I notice that the panning part of it is stinky, like, oh man, I put something at 10 o'clock, but it's really kind of like 9:30 to 11:30. I mean, it's kind of over there, right. And that really handicaps me because I'm the guy that wants to be able to put something at 8 o'clock and put something next to it at 7:58. And make sure that those two things don't share that space. And so when I don't have something like a really good word clock happening, and my panning definition goes away, then I struggle. So in answer to your question, playback for me is really minute takes. I almost never do what I talked about doing with keyboards. Like putting them at 8 and 11. I don't ever do that with playback really, but I do make space for each one of the stereo stems in that left and right panning. What do you do? Do you just left, right them?
By default, I do. And I'm going to, right out of the box, I'm just going to hope that these stems are well made. You know what I mean? And we've got to do one of these, if not several of these on just tracks in general. But we have to, man.
Yes.
And that'll be a good one, interesting. Plus, I'm sure we'll learn something. I like to assume everything's done properly, so I will at first hard pan them all. And really, the only time I'm gonna bring them in. Well, the continuation of that thought would be if I've had a hand in the formation of the tracks or stems, then I can feel confident to pan them hard and know that things are placed within that stereo image properly. The only time I'll bring things in is if there is an obvious unbalanced image for some reason. And a lot of times it's just the way the stems were made. It just there's some poor assistant that had to make 7 billion stems from this mix. You know what I mean? And it was 4 a.m. and they didn't notice that the tambourine is now panned hard right. I mean, I had this very thing happen to me a few months ago with someone I was working with the new single of theirs that they absolutely loved. And minute 1 of the first time we played the tracks, this like signature, it's like a snare hit coupled with a tambourine. It was like way off to the side. I'm like, God, that's like so important, but it's way the hell over there. And so exactly. So in that instance, I brought it in. If it can't be fixed,
had to. If it can't be fixed,
it couldn't be fixed in the box. It was printed.
This is a whole other discussion. The whole playback thing about like going back and if the playback stems are bad, I definitely go and talk to anybody to try to fix them. So like I will have a conversation with the recording engineer or the producer, or, I'll go to management and say, hey, can you give me the number of the producer? Cause this ain't happening right. And it usually is exactly what you described. Some assistant at 1 o'clock in the morning after everyone left made that stem and it's not right.
It's just wrong.
I am a super stickler about it, and I'll make them go back. Like I will. There's been 3 situations I can think of in my career where I have said, "This just ain't going to work, guys." Where it's something like what you described, where it's like so important to the sound of that song, and now it's hard pan to the right, and something else is hard pan to the left in this stem. It's just like, guys, we have to fix it. But anyway, that rabbit hole is deep. So
we'll go down that one. So we'll go that one separate. But by and large, so for the purpose of this question, yes, I usually start with everything hard panned and then only do it as a fix to bring it in.
Got it. Cool. Mixing from home, what are the tools that you use? Just real quick. Like, are you a Pro Tools guy? When you're mixing any sort of stuff at home, what do you use?
Nowadays, it's just all Pro Tools based. And it's all strictly in the box. Very well, because we speak often, there is to the right of me, sitting in boxes right now, is an LV1 that I want to play with. But it's usually just me in the box. Back in the day, I used to have a lot. I had more I/O, and so I could bring in analog stuff and work that into my workflow. But for me at home, I have a pair of JBL 708Ps, which are the same reference monitors that I take on the road. Yep. I usually don't have those here. That was something I picked up at the very end, right before COVID mania fully hit and shops were closed. I went to the shop and grabbed mine.
Wow.
Brought them home, but it's usually just on cans. I've got some universal audio stuff, the interfaces, but for me, it's just in the box, and it's more. I adhere to my same rules, but it's usually just exploration. So just a ton of plugins at home for me.
Cool. Yeah, same for me. I mean, I mix the box anyway. So coming home, the DAW of choice for me also is Pro Tools, only because that's what I learned on, you know what I mean? And so all the quick keys and all the stuff are stuff that I know. And, got nothing against Logic, and I have it and I like it and it does cool stuff, but I'm just slower on it, to be honest. Pro Tools is the DAW. And then I probably have three pairs of different monitors. I have the Focal BE6s or whatever, and the Sub.
I like those, the little guys.
Yeah, little guys. They're little 6-inch ones, but they are. I don't know, something about them. They are not ear fatiguing. Like I can mix on them like all day long. And not walk out of the room going, oh my God, And then I got another pair of RCF kind of near fields that are on purpose consumer level stuff. And those are like what I check my mixes on, just because I want to hear it on some sort of consumer level pair of speakers. And then I too also have the JBL 7 series stuff. So both of those. And I mix in the box and it's all plugins. I have a sound grid system that's hooked into Pro Tools. It's a HDX native card into a Macintosh Tower, and that is going into an IOX interface, which is a Waves interface that interfaces HD into Pro Tools, so that I can actually have Studio Grid plugins. You can have 7 plugins on one plugin insert of Pro Tools. Yeah.
I like that.
And what's cool about it is I offload anything that's a Waves plugin is now no longer taking the DSP of the Macintosh. All of its processing is being offloaded to a server. So now I can have much larger sessions, right? Because all the other plugins get the DSP from the Macintosh, and then the DSP from Waves is from that. So that's kind of why I do it.
I've got this Apollo Twin coupled with a satellite for the same reasons, for any of the UA stuff, which is huge DSP.
Yeah, totally.
Heavy.
Yeah.
It all gets farmed out.
Yeah. But I have a couple of analog pieces in my toolkit that I could use, but I really don't use them that often. I have the Max BCL from Waves, if I wanted to do some mastering, that's pretty much it. So anyway, that was a lot of fun. I mean, we're going to try to do more of these where we answer questions, because we know you guys have a lot of them. And hopefully, we got to one that you asked. But keep interacting with us. If the really awesome questions, we're definitely going to bring them up in our videos, and maybe next time we'll go down that, rabbit hole of talking about playback and stems. Anyway, all right, guys. Well, thanks a lot. Thank you, Chris, and we'll see you soon.
Man.
See you.
All right. See you.